Watch your own mind for a single day, and you'll catch it doing something subtle but relentless. Every time a task demands effort. Waking up early, opening that unfinished project, having a conversation you've been avoiding, pushing through a hard workout. Your brain quietly starts negotiating. It whispers reasons to wait, reasons to stop, reasons to choose the softer option. And it does this so smoothly, so convincingly, that most of the time you don't even realize it's happening. This is not a personal failure. It's not a character flaw or a sign that you're lazy or weak. It's software, evolutionary software that was written long before the modern world existed. Your brain evolved to conserve energy and minimize perceived threat. In an environment where physical danger was real and caloric resources were scarce, that programming kept your ancestors alive. Every unnecessary expenditure of energy was a survival risk. Every unfamiliar situation was a potential threat. The brain learned to default to stillness, familiarity, and the path of least resistance. The problem is that the world changed. The threats are different now. You're not being chased by a predator. You're being chased by a deadline, a habit you can't break, a version of yourself you keep promising to become. But your brain hasn't fully updated. It still treats discomfort like danger. It still interprets effort as a signal to retreat. And so the very mechanism that once protected your ancestors is now working against your growth. Psychologists call this the cognitive ease bias, the brain's deep preference for mental and physical states that require the least processing and the least strain. Neuroscience research shows that the prefrontal cortex, the seat of your long-term reasoning and decision-making, is routinely overridden by older, more instinctive brain regions when discomfort enters the picture. Your rational mind knows that hard work leads to results. Your survival architecture simply doesn't care about results. It cares about right now. The comfort software running in the background. Think of your brain as a device with a default operating mode. Call it comfort software. It runs in the background constantly, scanning your environment for anything that requires high output and flagging it as something to avoid. It's not malicious. It's just doing its job. But its job description was written for a world that no longer exists. And if you never override it, you spend your entire life letting ancient code make modern decisions. Here's where this becomes concrete. The comfort software doesn't block you all at once. It's subtle. It suggests a small delay. Just 5 more minutes. Start tomorrow when you're rested. This isn't the right time. You deserve a break. Each individual suggestion seems reasonable, but strung together across days and weeks, they add up to something devastating. A life stuck in neutral, a growing gap between who you are and who you intended to become. Every time you obey that software, it gets a small reward signal. The behavior is reinforced. Over time, avoidance stops being a choice and starts being a reflex. You don't even consciously decide to scroll your phone instead of writing. You just find yourself doing it. You don't consciously decide to skip the gym again. Your body is simply already on the couch. That's what fully installed comfort software looks like. Chapter 2. The real price of the easy path. Let's get honest about what choosing easy actually costs you. Not just the task that goes undone, but the deeper damage that accumulates beneath the surface. When you consistently choose comfort over difficulty, you're not just falling behind on your to-do list. You're training your nervous system in the art of avoidance. And avoidance, once practiced regularly, becomes a generalized habit. It starts with skipping one workout. Then it's avoiding a hard conversation. Then it's staying in a job that's killing your potential because looking for something new feels like too much friction. The habit expands outward like a stain. What begins as a small surrender to ease becomes the defining pattern of your life. The psychological cost runs even deeper. Think about your relationship with yourself, the internal sense of reliability you have toward your own word. Every time you promise yourself you'll do something and don't, that internal trust erodes. It's a gradual erosion, barely noticeable day to day, but compounding over months and years into something that feels like chronic low-grade self-doubt. You stop believing your own commitments. You make plans with a quiet internal asterisk. If I actually follow through this time. This is why self-trust matters more than motivation, more than talent, more than strategy. If you can't trust your own word with yourself, nothing else works. Goals become wishes. Intentions become fantasies. And the gap between who you could be and who you are gets wider every year. The digital age has made this worse. The comfort software in your brain didn't design the modern environment, but the modern environment was expertly engineered to exploit it. Every app on your phone was built by teams of engineers and behavioral scientists whose single goal was to make the path of least resistance run straight through their product. The notification that pulls you away from your work isn't accidental. It's deliberate friction removal. The infinite scroll wasn't designed for your benefit. It was designed to exploit your brain's tendency to seek novelty and ease. Remote work, constant connectivity, and the always-on digital environment have multiplied the number of easy exits available to you at any moment. In previous generations, if you wanted to avoid starting a difficult task, you had to physically go somewhere or find something else to do. Now the escape hatch is right in your pocket, always warm, always waiting. Your ancestors' brains never had to compete with the dopamine architecture of a smartphone. Yours does, every single day. Understanding this doesn't excuse giving into it, but it does clarify the task. You're not just fighting laziness. You're fighting a billion-dollar attention economy that has been deliberately built to activate your comfort software and keep it running. Chapter 3. Your internal autopilot and how to override it. When you understand the comfort software clearly, you understand something crucial. The solution is not willpower in the old-fashioned sense, gritting your teeth and forcing yourself through resistance through sheer mental muscle. That approach burns out fast. The brain can only sustain high-effort conscious decision-making for limited stretches. Relying on willpower alone is like trying to outrun a car on foot. You might win for a block. The car wins the race. The real solution is to rewire the autopilot itself. Instead of fighting your default settings every single time, you gradually reprogram what your brain considers normal. You make the hard thing feel less foreign. You change your internal identity from someone who avoids hard things to someone who does hard things. And that identity shift changes everything, because the brain doesn't just respond to what's easy or hard. It responds to what feels consistent with who you believe you are. Researchers studying habit formation have found that identity-based behavior change is significantly more durable than outcome-based change. When you try to change behavior by focusing on a goal, I want to lose 20 pounds, or I want to finish my project, the motivation is external and conditional. When you change behavior by updating your identity, I'm someone who trains consistently, or I'm someone who finishes what they start, the behavior becomes self-reinforcing. It aligns with your sense of self, and the brain strongly resists inconsistency with self-image. This is why every small hard choice you make matters beyond its immediate outcome. When you get up without hitting snooze, the value isn't just the extra 30 minutes. The value is the small piece of evidence you're depositing into your internal account of who you are. When you open the document and write the first paragraph even though you don't feel like it, the value isn't just the paragraph. The value is reinforcing the identity. I'm someone who starts. These small acts of evidence accumulate. Over time, they form a psychological foundation that is nearly impossible to shake. Practical exercise 1. Map your avoidance pattern. Right now, take a moment and write down 3 things you've been consistently avoiding. Not vague categories, specific things. The email you haven't sent, the conversation you've been postponing, the habit you've restarted and abandoned 4 times. Next to each one, write what your brain's excuse has been. Then ask yourself, how long have you been carrying this? What has the mental weight of avoiding it actually cost you in energy, focus, and self-respect? Naming the avoidance clearly is the first act of overriding the autopilot. Practical exercise 2. The 3-second launch protocol. The next time your brain begins its familiar negotiation around a task you know you should do, interrupt the process with a physical count. 3, 2, 1. Move. Don't analyze. Don't wait for a better feeling. Don't negotiate. Count down and begin the smallest possible action. If it's exercise, put on your shoes. If it's writing, open the file. If it's a call, dial the number. This technique, adapted from behavioral activation research, works by exploiting the brain's own momentum. Once you've physically initiated, the resistance drops dramatically. The hardest part is never the task itself. It's the gap between intention and the first movement. Chapter 4. Discomfort is not the enemy, it's the signal. Here's the reframe that changes everything once you actually absorb it. Discomfort is not a warning that something is wrong. It's a signal that something important is happening. Think about physical training. The sensation of muscle fatigue and burning is not your body failing. It's your body adapting. The discomfort is the mechanism of growth. The moment you stop pushing against resistance is the moment adaptation stops. Your muscles stay exactly where they are. Growth only happens at the edge of what's currently comfortable. Your mental and behavioral architecture works identically. The discomfort of starting a hard task, of staying in a difficult conversation, of following through when every instinct says stop, that discomfort is the mechanism of growth. Every time you move through it instead of retreating from it, you expand the outer edge of what your nervous system considers manageable. What was once overwhelming becomes merely difficult. What was once merely difficult becomes routine. This is not metaphorical. It is a literal neurological process. Repeated exposure to manageable stress, without catastrophic outcome, teaches your brain to recalibrate its threat response. The people you admire for their resilience and focus didn't start out with some special immunity to discomfort. They built their tolerance through accumulated exposure. They trained themselves to experience friction and keep moving. And crucially, they developed a different internal interpretation of discomfort. Not, this means stop, but this means I'm in the right territory. Rewiring the narrative. The comfort software generates stories. This is too hard. You're not ready for this. The timing is wrong. These stories feel true because they're delivered with emotional intensity. But they're just stories, patterns your brain learned to generate in the presence of difficulty. You can interrupt those stories with a different one. When discomfort appears, try this translation. This feeling means I'm at my growth edge. Not comfortable, but accurate. And accuracy is more useful than comfort. Practical exercise 3, the 7-day friction log. For 1 week, every time you notice yourself wanting to avoid something, check your phone instead of starting work, stay in bed instead of getting up, scroll instead of creating, write it down. Just the impulse, the excuse, and what you actually did. At the end of the week, read it back. You'll likely see patterns. The same excuses showing up in the same situations, the same moments of the day when your comfort software is loudest. Awareness of the pattern is the beginning of the ability to interrupt it. Chapter 5. Identity level change. Becoming the person who does hard things. The deepest change available to you is not behavioral, it's identity-based. It's not, I'm trying to exercise more. It's, I'm someone who trains. Not, I'm trying to be more disciplined. But, I'm a disciplined person who occasionally slips. The identity comes first, and the behavior follows. This matters because of how the brain processes self-consistency. Research in cognitive psychology shows that people feel genuine discomfort when their actions don't align with their stated identity. When you hold the identity, I'm a person who finishes what I start, leaving something undone creates an internal tension that pushes toward resolution. The brain wants to restore alignment between identity and behavior. That psychological pressure becomes a resource you can use. How do you build this identity? Not through declarations, not through writing, I am disciplined, on a sticky note, though journaling your wins helps reinforce it. You build it through accumulated evidence. Every time you choose the hard thing, you add a data point to the case your brain is building about who you are. Every time you override the comfort software, even in something small, even when no one is watching, you're not just completing a task. You're writing the story of a person who can be trusted to do hard things. This is why the details matter. The alarm you don't snooze. The workout you don't skip. The message you respond to immediately instead of leaving for later. Each of these is a vote cast for a particular identity. Enough votes, cast consistently enough, and the identity becomes stable. It becomes your new default. The comfort software is still running, but you've installed new code on top of it. Code that says, "This is who I am. This is what I do." The hidden reward. Here's what nobody tells you about consistently choosing difficulty. After a while, it stops feeling like deprivation. What felt like resistance becomes something closer to momentum. You start to recognize the feeling of pushing through the initial friction, not as punishment, but as the specific feeling of your own growth. And that feeling, that specific texture of moving through difficulty into competence, becomes something you actually want. Not always, not every day, but enough that it stops being a fight and starts being a practice. The transformation isn't dramatic. It doesn't arrive in a single moment. It accumulates the way a river shapes a canyon, slowly, invisibly, through the sustained application of consistent force. One day you look back and realize that the person who used to negotiate with the alarm, who used to leave things half-finished, who used to wait for motivation to show up before starting, that person has been replaced by someone quieter and steadier. Someone who simply begins. That's the architecture your mind is capable of building, but it only gets built one hard choice at a time. Chapter 6. The Completion Imperative. Why Finishing is a Superpower. Look at your life honestly, and you'll notice something uncomfortable. Starting is rarely the real problem. You start things all the time. You start the workout program, the online course, the creative project, the habit you swore this time would stick. The beginning is easy because beginnings are lightweight. No accumulated effort, no fatigue, no gap between the romantic idea and the grinding reality of following through. The problem is finishing. And finishing matters more than almost anything else you can train yourself to do. Not because productivity is the point, but because every time you complete something, you send a specific signal to your own brain. You tell it, "I can be trusted. My word to myself has weight. I am someone who sees things through." Every time you don't finish, you send the opposite signal. And that signal, delivered repeatedly across hundreds of small abandonments, quietly dismantles your self-trust. Not all at once, gradually, until one day you find yourself making plans with an internal wink, a private acknowledgement that you probably won't follow through because you never really do. The open loops eating your energy. There's a well-documented psychological phenomenon called the Zeigarnik effect, the brain's tendency to keep unfinished tasks active in working memory, generating low-level mental noise that persists until the task is resolved. Every incomplete project, every half-read book, every email you've composed in your head but never sent, every conversation you've avoided. Each of these represents an open loop running in the background of your mind. Like apps left open on a device you're not actively using, they don't disappear. They drain resources. Think about the last time you finished something you'd been carrying for a while, completed the report, sent the difficult message, finally had the conversation you'd been postponing. Remember the sensation immediately after? That specific lightness? That wasn't just relief about the task. That was the release of cognitive load you'd been carrying without fully realizing how heavy it was. Finishing doesn't just complete a task. It reclaims mental territory. The modern work environment is particularly brutal for completion. Notifications fragment your attention before you can reach closure on anything. Remote work removes the social accountability that once pushed projects to completion. The always-on inbox creates a permanent sense of incompleteness. There's always another message, always another thread, always another task arriving faster than the last one was finished. In this environment, the ability to deliberately close loops is not just a productivity skill. It's a form of mental self-defense. Finishing as identity. Here's the deeper truth about completion. It's not primarily about the work. It's about who you become through the act of finishing. Each completion is a small proof. Not proof of talent or intelligence or even effort, proof of follow-through. And follow-through, accumulated into a consistent pattern, becomes the foundation of a specific kind of self-confidence that cannot be purchased, borrowed, or faked. It can only be built, one finished thing at a time. This is why people who are genuinely high-functioning, not just occasionally motivated but consistently effective, tend to have a particular relationship with completion. They treat unfinished things as an active cost, not a neutral state. They feel the weight of open loops acutely and are driven to close them. This isn't perfectionism. Perfectionists often can't finish because they can't tolerate imperfection. This is something different, a commitment to closure for its own sake, a tolerance for imperfect completion over perfect incompletion. Done imperfectly beats perfect in your head every single time. This is not an inspirational slogan. It's an operational truth. The project you shipped with rough edges taught you something. The project still living in your drafts folder, perfect in imagination, non-existent in reality, taught you nothing and cost you everything you invested in avoiding its completion. Chapter 7. The Architecture of Character, Small Choices, Permanent Consequences. Your character is not forged in the dramatic moments. It is not made in the grand gestures, the public declarations, or the moments when you know people are watching. It is built, brick by brick, almost invisibly, in the tiny decisions that occur dozens of times each day when the only witness is you. The choice to check your phone the moment you sit down to focus. The choice to stay in bed when the alarm tells you otherwise. The choice to close the laptop the moment the work gets difficult. The choice to eat the easy thing instead of the nourishing thing. The choice to say nothing when honesty is needed. These choices feel inconsequential in isolation. They feel like they don't count. But they do count. They are, in fact, the only things that count, because they are the actual material of who you are. Every time you choose the hard option in a small moment, you cast a vote for a particular version of yourself. A version that can be trusted. A version that doesn't negotiate with discomfort. A version that keeps its word even when no one is checking. Enough votes cast in the same direction and that version of you stops being an aspiration. It becomes the default. The seduction of digital ease. In the current environment, the easy choice has never been easier. The path of least resistance has been engineered to be frictionless, luminous, and always available. Social media algorithms are optimized to surface exactly the content most likely to hijack your attention at exactly the moment you're most vulnerable, tired, bored, or facing a task that demands effort. Streaming platforms are designed to eliminate every possible interruption between you and the next episode. Food delivery apps have reduced the friction of poor eating decisions to a few taps. This is not neutral. It is a designed environment built to exploit your comfort software, and it is extraordinarily effective. Studies on attention and self-control consistently show that environments, not willpower, are the primary driver of behavior. When the easy choice is also the omnipresent choice, character is being tested continuously, whether you're aware of it or not. The response to this is not to demonize technology or pretend you can live outside the digital environment. The response is to understand the game being played and to design your own environment deliberately rather than passively accepting the one designed for you by people whose interests are not aligned with yours. Move the apps. Change the defaults. Introduce friction where there is none. Make the hard choice architecturally easier and the easy choice architecturally harder. This is what behavioral scientists call choice architecture, the deliberate design of your environment to support the behavior you actually want. Practical exercise 4, the hard choice diary. For 1 week, keep a simple log. Each evening, write down one moment from that day when you chose the hard thing over the easy thing. It doesn't have to be dramatic. Getting up on the first alarm counts. Sending a message you'd been avoiding counts. Closing your phone and returning to work counts. At the end of the week, read it back. You'll see something important. You are already making hard choices more than you realize. The exercise isn't just to build the habit. It's to make visible what's already happening and reinforce the identity narrative those choices are building. Practical exercise 5. 1. Environmental redesign. Identify one specific moment in your day when the easy choice reliably wins. When you check your phone instead of starting work, open the streaming app instead of the book, hit snooze instead of getting up. Now engineer one environmental change that increases the friction of the easy choice or decreases the friction of the hard one. Put the phone in another room. Set the book on your pillow. Put your workout clothes out the night before. One change, applied consistently, outperforms any amount of willpower applied inconsistently. Chapter 8. Building the mental architecture that lasts. Everything in this first section has been pointing toward a single destination: the construction of a mental architecture that doesn't depend on how you feel. An internal structure that functions regardless of your mood, your energy level, your level of inspiration. A foundation that holds when motivation disappears, and motivation always, eventually, disappears. This architecture is built from 3 materials. The first is identity, a stable, evidence-based sense of yourself as someone who does hard things. Not an identity you claim, but one you earn through repeated action. Not, I want to be disciplined, but I have evidence that I am disciplined, and here is that evidence. The second is environment, the deliberate design of your physical and digital surroundings to support the behavior you want rather than the behavior that's easiest. Your environment will shape your behavior far more powerfully than your intentions will. Align them. The third is systems, consistent routines and protocols that remove the need for decision-making in moments of low resistance. When you have to decide each morning whether to exercise, you're relying on in-the-moment willpower, which is always weakest precisely when you need it most. When exercise is a non-negotiable system, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, first thing, the decision has already been made. You're not choosing, you're executing. These 3 elements, identity, environment, and systems, form a self-reinforcing architecture. Identity drives behavior. Behavior shapes environment. Environment removes friction from the right choices. Consistent choices deepen identity. The cycle runs in both directions. It can trap you in avoidance or carry you toward the person you are trying to become. The direction it runs depends entirely on the choices you make today, in the small moments that feel like they don't matter, but actually constitute your entire life. A final note on what this is not. Mental architecture is not about becoming a machine. It's not about eliminating rest, or joy, or spontaneity. It's not about suffering as a virtue. It's about having enough internal structure that your best self, the version of you that values growth, completion, honesty, and follow through, gets to show up consistently, not just on the days when you happen to feel good. The goal is a life that is genuinely yours, built by your choices rather than shaped by your avoidances. That life is available to you, but it requires a foundation. This first part of the book has been about building that foundation. What comes next is learning to live on it. Chapter 9. The Motivation Myth: Why Waiting for Inspiration is a Trap. Here's a question worth sitting with honestly. How much of your life have you spent waiting to feel ready? Waiting for the right mood to start the project? Waiting for energy levels to climb before hitting the gym? Waiting for the anxiety to subside before having the difficult conversation? Waiting for inspiration to arrive before doing creative work? Waiting, in general, for some internal condition to be met before taking action? If you recognize this pattern, you're not alone. Modern culture has built an entire industry around the idea that action should follow feeling. That motivation is the fuel, and without fuel, the engine shouldn't run. Inspirational content, motivational speakers, morning routine gurus, all of it operates on an implicit premise. Get your emotional state right first, and the behavior will flow naturally. That premise is wrong, and believing it has cost more people more time and more potential than almost any other idea in the self-improvement space. Here is what behavioral neuroscience actually shows. Motivation is not a precondition for action. It is a consequence of action. The neurochemical reward that makes you feel engaged, energized, and driven doesn't arrive before you begin. It arrives after. Dopamine, the neurotransmitter most associated with motivation and drive, is released not in anticipation of effort, but in response to progress. The feeling of momentum, that sense of being in the zone, is generated by movement, not by waiting for movement to feel right. This means the entire model most people operate on is reversed. You don't act because you're motivated. You become motivated because you acted. The climate of your emotions. Your emotional state on any given day is the result of dozens of variables you don't fully control. Sleep quality, blood sugar, ambient stress, unresolved conversations, the news you consumed before breakfast, the hormonal rhythms of your body. Expecting this system to be consistently favorable before you take action is not a strategy. It's a dependency on conditions that are inherently unreliable. Think about what this means practically. If you only work on your goals when you feel like it, your progress will be as inconsistent as your emotional weather. Some weeks you'll feel energized and you'll do a lot. Other weeks, the weeks when life is heavy, when sleep is poor, when the world feels difficult, you'll do nothing. And those weeks exist for everyone. The difference between people who build things and people who drift is not that some people feel good more often. It's that some people have learned to act regardless of how they feel. Remote workers understand this viscerally. Without the external structure of an office, a commute, and social accountability, the full weight of self-direction falls on the individual. The people who thrive in remote environments are not the people who happen to feel motivated every day. They're the people who have built systems that produce action independent of mood. They've separated the decision to act from the feeling of wanting to act. You are not your current emotional state. This is perhaps the most important reframe in this entire book. Your emotions are real. They deserve acknowledgement. But they are not you. They are weather patterns passing through you. You are the sky, not the storm. And the sky doesn't stop being the sky because a storm is moving through it. When you internalize this distinction, something shifts. You stop waiting for the storm to pass before you move. You learn to move through the storm. The discomfort is real, but it's not a command. It's information, and you get to decide what to do with that information. Chapter 10. The Action First Protocol: Engineering Motion Before Motivation. The practical implication of everything in the previous chapter is simple but demanding. You must build a relationship with action that does not require a favorable emotional state as a prerequisite. You must learn to move first and feel later. This is not a natural way for most people to operate. It requires a deliberate rewiring of the sequence your brain expects. But it is learnable, and once learned, it becomes self-reinforcing, because every time you act without feeling like it and experience the subsequent shift in mood and energy, you deposit evidence into your internal account. Action changes how I feel. Over time, that evidence becomes a resource you can draw on when resistance is highest. The non-negotiable system. The most reliable method for building action that doesn't depend on motivation is to create a category of behaviors that simply are not subject to daily deliberation. Not, I'll exercise if I feel up to it, but I exercise on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. That's not a preference. It's a fact about me. Not, I'll work on my project when I'm inspired, but from 7 to 8 a.m., I work on my project. Every day, that time belongs to that work. When you remove a behavior from the domain of daily decision-making, you remove it from the reach of your daily emotional state. The behavior becomes something you do the way you brush your teeth, not because you feel like it, not because you're inspired by the outcome, but because it's simply what happens at that time. Automaticity is not the absence of effort. It's the rerouting of effort away from the decision and toward the execution. Research on habit formation consistently shows that implementation intentions, specific plans that link a situation to a behavior, when X happens, I will do Y, dramatically increase follow-through compared to vague goal setting. I will exercise fails far more often than, when I finish breakfast on weekday mornings, I will put on my shoes and walk for 20 minutes. The specificity eliminates the decision point. There's nothing to negotiate. Micro-commitments as entry points. One of the most effective techniques for overriding the resistance to starting is to make the commitment so small it becomes genuinely difficult to justify avoiding. Not, I will work on my presentation for 2 hours, which your brain immediately evaluates as a large, effortful block and begins generating reasons to postpone. But I will open the presentation file and write one sentence. That's it. One sentence. The reason this works is neurological. The act of beginning, even a trivially small beginning, changes your brain state. It activates the circuits associated with task engagement. It releases a small amount of the dopaminergic reward associated with progress. It creates a form of psychological commitment called the zygarnic tension. Once you've started something, your brain wants to see it through. The resistance to continuing is dramatically lower than the resistance to beginning. This is the engine behind what productivity researchers call the 2-minute rule and what athletes call just lacing up your shoes. The principle is consistent across domains. Reduce the size of the entry point until avoidance becomes less comfortable than starting. Then let momentum do the rest. Practical exercise 6, the daily non-negotiables list. Identify 3 behaviors that you commit to executing every single day, regardless of mood, energy, or circumstances. Make them small enough that on your worst day, sick, exhausted, overwhelmed, you could still do them. Perhaps it's drinking a glass of water before looking at your phone, writing 3 sentences, walking for 10 minutes. The content matters less than the consistency. These 3 behaviors are your daily proof of concept, evidence, renewed each day, that you are someone who follows through. Practical exercise 7, the 60-second ignition. For 1 week, whenever you find yourself avoiding a task you know you should do, set a timer for 60 seconds and commit to beginning that task before the timer expires. Not completing it, beginning it. Open the document. Send the first message. Step onto the treadmill. Begin. What you'll discover is that in the overwhelming majority of cases, beginning dissolves the resistance almost entirely. The task that seemed immovable from a distance becomes manageable the moment you're in contact with it. Chapter 11. Stress as Training Ground. Building calm under pressure. Your ability to function under stress is not fixed. It is a trainable capacity, and like all trainable capacities, it develops through progressive exposure to the thing you're trying to get better at. This is not an intuitive idea for most people, because the natural response to stress is to reduce it, to solve the problem, remove the pressure, return to equilibrium. And sometimes that's exactly the right response. But there's a category of stress that can't be eliminated and shouldn't be avoided. The stress of growth, the stress of difficulty, the stress of being in circumstances that exceed your current comfort level. That stress, if you engage with it rather than flee from it, is the raw material of resilience. Consider how your body responds to acute stress. Heart rate elevates, breathing accelerates, attention narrows. Blood is directed toward the muscles and away from the digestive system. This is the stress response, the same physiological cascade that your ancestors used to survive physical threat. In the modern world, this response fires in response to a difficult email, a tense conversation, a deadline, a moment of public speaking. The trigger is cognitive, but the response is physical and deeply automatic. Here's what most people don't know. The stress response itself is not harmful. What's harmful is the interpretation of the stress response. Research by psychologist Alia Crum at Stanford has shown that people who interpret their stress response as helpful, as the body mobilizing resources for a challenge, perform better, recover faster, and experience fewer negative health outcomes than people who interpret the same physiological state as threatening and try to suppress it. The same pounding heart can mean, "I'm about to be destroyed," or "my body is preparing me to perform." The physiological signal is identical. The interpretation is a choice, and the interpretation shapes the outcome. The exposure ladder. If you want to expand your capacity to stay calm under pressure, the method is structured exposure. Deliberately seeking out situations that activate your stress response at a manageable level, then practicing regulation within them. Not catastrophic stress, not avoidable stress. The specific stress of situations that stretch your capacity slightly beyond its current edge. If public speaking makes you anxious, the path is not to avoid public speaking. It's to speak publicly in small, low-stakes settings repeatedly until your nervous system learns from the accumulated evidence that this situation is not catastrophic. If difficult conversations activate your avoidance instinct, the path is not to keep avoiding them. It's to have small, manageable, difficult conversations regularly, building a library of experiences in which you initiated discomfort and survived it, even benefited from it. This is exactly how athletes train mental toughness. Not by being thrown into the most extreme possible conditions immediately, but by progressive overload. Incrementally more challenging situations, each one slightly beyond the previous comfort edge, each one expanding the range of what the nervous system considers manageable. Breathing as the master override. Of all the tools available for real-time stress regulation, breathing is simultaneously the most powerful and the most underused. The reason is physiological. Your breath is the only component of the autonomic nervous system that you can control consciously. When you deliberately slow and deepen your breathing, you activate the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest counterpart to the stress response, and create a genuine, measurable reduction in physiological arousal within seconds. The specific pattern matters less than the principle. Exhaling longer than you inhale activates the parasympathetic response most effectively. A simple protocol: inhale for 4 counts, hold for 4 counts, exhale for 6 counts. 3 to 5 cycles of this pattern in a moment of acute stress will meaningfully change your physiological state. Not eliminate the stress, but bring it within a range where your prefrontal cortex can function effectively and you can respond rather than react. Practical exercise 8, the stress rewrite. The next time you notice yourself in a state of acute stress or anxiety, take a piece of paper and write 3 things. What specifically is causing the stress? What within this situation you can actually influence or control, and one concrete action you could take in the next hour. This process does something important. It converts the diffuse, catastrophizing quality of anxious thinking, which tends to spiral outward and enlarge the problem, into a bounded, solvable set of specific elements. The monster under the bed almost always looks smaller when you turn the light on. Practical exercise 9, the daily discomfort practice. Each day, choose one small thing you've been avoiding because it's uncomfortable and do it. Not a life-altering hard thing, a small one. The cold shower you've been avoiding, the stretching routine you find boring, the message you've been putting off, the extra set at the gym. The practice is not about the specific activity. It's about training your nervous system's relationship with discomfort. Daily exposure to small doses of chosen discomfort is the most reliable method for expanding your overall stress tolerance. You are building a muscle. It requires regular use. Chapter 12. The voice that says stop, and what to do when you hear it. There is a voice. You know it well. It appears not at the beginning of hard things, not when you're fresh and the task is new and the energy is available. It appears in the middle, when you've been working for a while, when fatigue is real and the end is not yet in sight, when the initial momentum has faded and what's left is just the grinding, unglamorous work of continuing. The voice is not loud. That's what makes it dangerous. It doesn't arrive shouting. It arrives whispering. You've done enough. No one will know the difference. You can finish this tomorrow. You deserve a break. Take a rest. You've earned it. The voice sounds reasonable. It sounds almost kind. It presents itself as wisdom, as your body and mind communicating genuine need. And sometimes it is. The ability to distinguish genuine depletion from manufactured excuse is a skill worth developing. But most of the time, the vast majority of the time, the voice arrives not at the point of genuine exhaustion, but at the point of discomfort. At the point where effort is real, but capacity remains. Where continuing would cost something, but is entirely possible. This is the moment that matters most. Not the beginning, which is energized by novelty. Not the end, which is energized by proximity to completion. The middle, the grinding, unglamorous, unwitnessed middle, is where character is actually built. It's where the gap opens between people who reach their potential and people who don't. The identity cost of stopping early. Every time you stop at the voice's suggestion, not because you're genuinely depleted, but because continuing is uncomfortable, you pay a price that doesn't show up immediately. The price is subtle and internal, a small erosion of trust in your own capacity. A tiny confirmation of the narrative that you stop when things get hard. These individual erosions are negligible, but compounded across hundreds of moments, across years, they form a settled belief. I don't finish hard things. And that belief shapes every subsequent attempt at difficulty. The reverse is equally true. Every time you hear the voice and continue anyway, not because you feel like it, but because you decided to, you pay yourself a different dividend. A small deposit of evidence into the account of your own reliability. Over time, these deposits compound into something that cannot be argued with, a track record. And a track record of continuing through difficulty is the foundation of genuine confidence. Not the performed confidence of someone who talks about their goals, but the quiet, unshakable confidence of someone who has repeatedly proven to themselves that they can. Practical exercise 10, the +1 standard. From today forward, adopt one operational rule for any task that involves sustained effort. When the voice says stop, do one more unit before you do. One more set, one more paragraph, one more call, one more minute. The unit can be as small as the situation requires. The point is not the extra output, though it matters. The point is the practice of establishing that the voice does not have final authority. That you, the part of you that made the decision to begin, gets to decide when it's time to stop. Not the voice, not the discomfort. You. Chapter 13. The Promise Architecture. Why small commitments beat big declarations. Your brain is an evidence collection machine. Every single day, without your conscious awareness, it is gathering data about one fundamental question. Can I trust this person? And the person it's evaluating is you. Not the version of you that exists in your intentions. Not the version that lives in your goals, your vision boards, your late-night journal entries about who you're going to become. The version of you that actually shows up in the small, unwitnessed moments when a commitment meets a moment of inconvenience. That version, the one that either keeps the promise or doesn't. This is the mechanism behind something that confuses many people. Why do some individuals seem to move through life with a quiet, unshakable confidence that has nothing to do with their external circumstances, while others, equally talented, equally intelligent, sometimes more, seem perpetually uncertain, perpetually on the edge of giving up? The difference, almost always, traces back to the accumulated weight of kept versus broken self-promises. The confident person has built, over years of small kept commitments, an internal track record that their brain can reference in moments of doubt. The uncertain person has built the opposite, a record of intentions abandoned, of promises made and dissolved, of a self that cannot be fully relied upon. The critical insight is this: the size of the promise is almost irrelevant. What matters is the ratio of kept to broken. A person who makes 10 small promises and keeps all 10 has stronger self-trust than a person who makes one enormous promise and fails. The brain doesn't grade on ambition. It grades on follow-through. Why big declarations fail? There is a seductive feeling that comes with making a sweeping commitment. Starting Monday, I'm completely changing my diet. From now on, I'm waking up at 5 a.m. every day. This year, I'm building the business. The emotional charge of the declaration feels like progress. Neurologically, it is. Making the commitment activates some of the same reward circuits as achieving the goal. The brain gets a hit of anticipatory satisfaction. The problem is that this hit of satisfaction is borrowed against future effort that hasn't happened yet. And when the effort proves harder than the declaration anticipated, which it always does, the gap between the commitment and the current reality becomes a source of shame and avoidance rather than motivation. You don't just fail to hit the goal. You fail at the identity you declared. An identity-level failure is far more painful than goal-level failure. So the brain, running its standard avoidance subroutine, protects you from that pain by quietly letting the commitment dissolve. The solution is not to stop making commitments. It's to make commitments your brain can actually honor. Start not with the commitment that would be most impressive if you kept it, but with the commitment that is so achievable that failing would be genuinely embarrassing. One glass of water before coffee, one page before bed, one message answered before you open your feed. These commitments are not beneath you. They are the foundation beneath you, the compounding effect of kept promises. Think of your self-trust as a savings account. Each kept promise, regardless of size, is a deposit. Each broken promise is a withdrawal. The account that matters is not how large any single deposit is. It's whether the account is growing or shrinking. A consistent series of small deposits, maintained over months and years, generates a level of internal wealth, a depth of self-trust, that no single dramatic gesture can match. And just as with financial compounding, the returns accelerate over time. Early on, the deposits feel small and the change feels imperceptible. But there is a threshold, different for everyone, but real for everyone, where the accumulated evidence becomes undeniable. Where your brain stops asking, "Can I trust myself?" and starts operating from the assumption that yes, you can. That shift, from chronic self-doubt to settled self-trust, changes how you move through every area of your life. Practical exercise 11, the 3 Promise Morning. Each morning, before you open your phone or engage with any external demand, write down 3 specific promises for the day. Not aspirations, promises. Concrete, completable, unambiguous. I will send the email to Sarah before noon. I will walk for 15 minutes after lunch. I will close my laptop by 9 p.m. At the end of the day, review them. Mark what you kept. If you broke one, note why, not to punish yourself, but to understand the pattern. Over 30 days, this practice will show you exactly where your self-promise system breaks down and give you the data to strengthen it. Practical exercise 12, the never break twice rule. Accept in advance that you will fail sometimes. Miss a day? Skip the habit. Break the promise. That is not the problem. The problem is consecutive failure. 2 days in a row, then 3, then a week, until the commitment has quietly died without a formal burial. Adopt a single rule. Whatever promise you break today, you keep tomorrow. No exceptions. No renegotiation. The streak doesn't have to be perfect. It has to be resilient. One miss followed by an immediate return is not failure. It's the practice. Chapter 14. The Procrastination Machine. Understanding how it actually works. Procrastination is not a time management problem. This is the most important thing to understand about it, because if you treat it as a time management problem, you will keep applying time management solutions, schedules, planners, productivity apps, and keep being confused when the problem persists. Procrastination is an emotion regulation problem. The task you're avoiding is not being avoided because you don't have time for it. It's being avoided because engaging with it produces a negative emotional state: anxiety, boredom, self-doubt, fear of failure, uncertainty about where to begin, and your brain has learned that not engaging with it removes that negative state. Avoidance is reinforced not by what you gain, but by what you escape. This explains why procrastination follows such a consistent pattern across such different types of people and tasks. It explains why you can have a completely clear schedule and still not do the thing. It explains why adding more structure, more reminders, and more accountability systems sometimes makes it worse, because the underlying emotional driver has not been addressed. The feeling that makes the task aversive is still there. You've just added more things to feel bad about avoiding. What the avoidance is actually protecting. When you look closely at what you most reliably procrastinate on, a pattern typically emerges. The tasks with the highest avoidance load tend to be the ones that matter most. The creative work that could be judged, the business idea that could fail, the relationship conversation that could go badly, the health behavior that requires confronting how far you've drifted from where you want to be. The avoidance is not random. It clusters around significance. This makes evolutionary sense. The more important an outcome, the more the brain amplifies the threat signals associated with it. A task with low stakes produces low anxiety on failure. A task with high stakes, where failure would mean something about your capacity, your worth, your potential, produces correspondingly high anxiety. And high anxiety activates the avoidance response powerfully. Understanding this doesn't eliminate the anxiety, but it reframes the avoidance. You're not lazy. You're not undisciplined. You're human, with a brain that has learned to protect you from emotional pain by keeping you away from its sources. The work is not to shame yourself out of the avoidance. It's to gradually teach your brain that the thing it's avoiding is survivable, and that the emotional cost of engaging is consistently lower than the emotional cost of not engaging. The illusion of the perfect moment. One of the most reliable features of the procrastination machine is its ability to generate a compelling case for waiting. The timing isn't right. You need more information before you can start. You'll do better work when you're rested. The conditions will be more favorable next week. Each of these arguments can occasionally be true, but the procrastinating mind deploys them indiscriminately as a general-purpose delay mechanism rather than as genuine situational assessment. The antidote is to notice the pattern rather than evaluating each argument on its own merits. When you find yourself consistently generating reasons why now is not the right time to start something specific, that consistency is the signal. It's not a series of accurate situational assessments. It's the procrastination machine doing what it was built to do. The real test is simple. If you had to do this thing right now, not perfectly, not with ideal conditions, but adequately, with what you have, could you? Almost always, the answer is yes. The obstacle is not capability. It is the story that capability requires conditions that don't currently exist. Practical exercise 13, the immediate action reflex. Choose one task you've been procrastinating on. Right now, not after you finish this chapter, not later today, but the moment you encounter it, take one concrete action toward it. Not the whole task. One action. Open the document. Make the first note. Send the first message. The practice is to collapse the gap between intention and initiation to as close to zero as possible. Every time you do this successfully, you are training a new reflex. Task recognized, action taken, gap eliminated. Over time, this reflex becomes faster and more automatic. The procrastination machine loses its processing time. Practical exercise 14, the anxiety audit. For your top 3 procrastinated tasks, write down honestly, what specifically am I afraid of if I engage with this? Not what I tell myself when I'm avoiding it. The real thing. The project might not be good enough. The conversation might go badly. I might discover I'm not as capable as I hoped. Naming the actual fear with clarity and honesty removes a significant portion of its power. What you can see clearly, you can work with. What remains unnamed continues to operate invisibly. Chapter 15. Designing systems that work without willpower. Here is a truth that most self-improvement content resists acknowledging. Willpower is unreliable. Not because you're weak, because willpower is a limited cognitive resource that depletes with use, varies with sleep and blood sugar and stress, and is consistently outmatched by a sufficiently well-designed environment. This does not mean you have no agency. It means your agency is most powerfully expressed not in the daily moments of resistance, where willpower operates, but in the upstream moments of system design, where you decide what the default conditions of your life will be. The person who sleeps with their phone in another room and leaves a book on their nightstand has made one decision that will positively influence their behavior hundreds of times without requiring willpower at each instance. That is leverage. That is system design. The shift from a willpower-based approach to a systems-based approach is one of the highest leverage changes available to anyone trying to build more consistent behavior. Willpower says, each day I will choose the right thing through force of will. Systems say, I will design my environment so that the right thing is also the easiest thing and the wrong thing requires active effort to access. Friction as a design tool. The concept of behavioral friction, the degree of effort required to perform a behavior, is one of the most useful lenses in behavior design. Research consistently shows that even tiny amounts of added friction can dramatically reduce unwanted behaviors, and tiny reductions in friction can dramatically increase desired ones. People are not primarily rational decision makers weighing costs and benefits. They are primarily friction minimizers, taking the path that requires the least immediate effort. This means friction is a tool you can wield deliberately. Want to reduce your social media use? Log out of the apps after each session. The extra 30 seconds of friction is surprisingly effective at interrupting automatic checking behavior. Want to exercise more consistently? Prepare everything the night before so that in the morning, the path to the gym is frictionless and the path back to bed requires active avoidance. Want to eat better? Don't buy the food you're trying to eat less of. The friction of having to go out and get it is far more effective than willpower applied to food that's already in your kitchen. Attention as a finite resource. In the digital environment, your attention is not just a personal resource. It is a commodity being actively competed for by entities with vastly more resources than you have available to protect it. Every notification, every algorithmically curated feed, every autoplay function is a friction reduction mechanism designed to decrease the effort required to give your attention to something other than what you intended. Managing your attention is therefore not just a productivity strategy. It is a fundamental act of self-determination. The decisions you make about your digital environment, which apps to keep, which notifications to allow, when to be accessible and when not to be, are not trivial personal preferences. They are the primary leverage points for determining whether your attention, the scarcest and most valuable resource you have, goes where you choose or where it is steered. Practical exercise 15, the friction audit. Map the 3 behaviors you most want to do more of and the 3 you most want to do less of. For each more behavior, identify one way to reduce the friction, make it easier to begin, remove a preparatory step, pre-commit to a specific time and location. For each less behavior, identify one way to increase the friction, add a step between you and the behavior, remove the trigger from your environment. Introduce a brief mandatory pause. Implement one change from each list this week. The asymmetry you create in friction levels will do more work than any amount of motivation. Practical exercise 16, the default settings review. Spend 20 minutes reviewing the default settings of your digital life. Which apps send you notifications? Which ones are on your home screen? When is your phone's first notification allowed in the morning? These defaults were not designed with your goals in mind. They were designed to maximize engagement with platforms. Reset them with your goals in mind instead. This is not a dramatic intervention. Done consistently, it is one of the most powerful environmental changes available. Chapter 16. The Discipline Flywheel. How Consistency Compounds. There is a specific quality of person you have probably encountered. Someone who seems to operate with a quiet, sustainable intensity that doesn't depend on peaks of motivation or valleys of guilt. Someone who shows up consistently, works steadily, follows through reliably, and does all of this without the drama of constant internal battle. They don't seem to be white-knuckling through resistance every day. They seem to have made a kind of peace with difficulty that you haven't yet found. What you're observing is what happens when the discipline flywheel reaches operational speed. A flywheel is a mechanical device that stores rotational energy. The first rotations are hard. You're working against inertia, putting in effort that doesn't immediately produce proportional movement. But as the flywheel gains speed, something shifts. The stored energy starts contributing to the next rotation. The effort required per rotation decreases while the output per rotation increases. Eventually, the flywheel reaches a speed where it sustains itself, where the momentum built from previous rotations carries the next ones forward. Discipline works exactly this way. The first weeks of any new consistent behavior are the hardest because you're working entirely against inertia. The behavior is unfamiliar, the identity hasn't caught up, the neural pathways are not yet established. Every repetition requires full conscious effort. But gradually, slowly, almost imperceptibly at first, the flywheel begins to turn. The behavior becomes more familiar. The identity begins to align. The neural pathways deepen. The resistance decreases not because the behavior has become easier, but because you have become more capable of it. And then, at some point that is different for every behavior and every person, a threshold is crossed. The behavior is no longer something you do despite resistance. It is something you do because not doing it creates a different kind of discomfort, the discomfort of inconsistency, of a gap between your identity and your actions. The flywheel is spinning. Maintaining it now takes less energy than stopping it. This is the destination, not a life of constant heroic effort, not daily white-knuckling through resistance. A life where the behaviors that matter to you have become, through consistent repetition, the path of least resistance, where who you are and how you behave have become aligned enough that the comfort software and the action identity are no longer in constant conflict. Getting there requires the early hard rotations. There is no shortcut through the inertia phase. But understanding that the inertia phase is temporary, that the flywheel does eventually reach speed, that the effort does eventually compound, changes your relationship to the difficulty of the early stage. You're not grinding indefinitely. You're building momentum that will eventually carry you. Practical exercise 17, the 30-day flywheel. Choose one behavior you want to establish as a genuine discipline, something that currently requires significant effort and that you want to become more automatic. Commit to performing it every single day for 30 days without exception. Keep a visible record, a calendar on your wall with an X marked for each successful day. The visual chain of completed days creates its own momentum. Missing a day means breaking the chain, and the longer the chain, the more costly a break feels. At the end of 30 days, evaluate honestly. Is the behavior easier than it was on day one? Almost certainly yes. That ease is the flywheel turning. Chapter 17. The Identity Closing Argument. You are what you repeatedly do. Everything in this book has been building toward a single conclusion, and it's time to state it plainly. You are not your intentions. You are not your potential. You are not the person you describe yourself as in your best moments, or the person you imagine yourself becoming once the conditions are right. You are the aggregate of your repeated actions, the behaviors you return to consistently, the commitments you keep or break quietly, the choices you make when no one is watching and there is no immediate consequence either way. This is not a harsh judgment. It is a liberating one, because it means the distance between who you are and who you want to be is not a matter of talent, luck, intelligence, or circumstance. It is a matter of behavior, repeated behavior, and behavior can be changed. The ancient philosopher Aristotle framed this with a precision that has never been improved upon. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act but a habit. Modern neuroscience has confirmed the mechanism behind this observation. Repeated behaviors literally reshape the brain, strengthening the neural pathways associated with those behaviors through a process called myelination, making them faster, more automatic, more default. Who you are, neurologically speaking, is the accumulated record of what you have done most often. This means two things that are equally important. First, the version of you that avoids hard things, that procrastinates, that breaks promises to itself. That version was built through repeated behavior, and it can be unbuilt the same way. It is not your permanent nature. It is your current default setting, established through practice. Second, the version of you that you want to become is not waiting for some external permission or favorable condition. It is being constructed or not constructed right now through the choices you are making today. The gap between knowing and being. There is a version of self-improvement that is entirely intellectual. Reading the books, understanding the concepts, being able to articulate the principles with clarity and sophistication, while the actual behavior remains unchanged. This is not transformation. It is the acquisition of a more elaborate story about why you're not transforming. Real change is not a cognitive event. It is a behavioral event, repeated until it becomes a neurological event. You don't think your way into a new identity. You act your way into it. The thinking is useful as orientation. It helps you understand what you're building and why. But the building itself happens only through action, and the action has to be repeated enough times that it becomes structural. The gap between knowing and being is bridged by one thing only: consistent, repeated, unglamorous execution. The execution that happens when you're tired. The execution that happens when no one is watching. The execution that happens on the unremarkable Tuesday morning when there is no inspiration, no momentum, no particular reason to follow through except that you said you would. Practical exercise 18, the identity statement. Write a single sentence that describes the person you are becoming. Not who you want to be someday, but who you are in the process of becoming right now through your current actions. Make it behavioral and specific. Not, I am a disciplined person, too abstract. Something like, I am someone who keeps commitments to myself even when it's inconvenient. Or, I am someone who starts difficult tasks without waiting to feel ready. Post it somewhere you will see it every morning. Not as an affirmation to be repeated passively, but as a standard against which to measure each day's choices. Chapter 18. Attention Management, the behavior you're not tracking. If you want to understand the actual architecture of your life, not the life you intend to live, but the life you are living, follow your attention. Not your time, not your calendar, your attention. Where does your mind actually go in the unclaimed moments of the day? What do you reach for when a task becomes difficult and the path of least resistance opens up? What occupies the idle space between structured demands? The answer to these questions tells you more about who you are and who you are becoming than any goal you've set or plan you've made. Attention is the master resource. Time is fixed. You have exactly the same number of hours in a day as every person you admire. But attention determines what those hours actually produce. Two people can spend the same amount of time working and achieve radically different results depending on the quality of attention brought to that time. The person working with full, undivided attention for 2 hours produces more than the person half working, half distracted for 5. The contemporary environment is, at its core, an attention extraction system. The platforms you use daily are not tools designed to serve your goals. They are products designed to capture and hold your attention as efficiently as possible, because your attention is what they monetize. Every design decision, the infinite scroll, the variable reward schedule of notifications, the algorithmically tuned content feed, is optimized for one outcome: keeping your attention engaged with the platform rather than directed toward whatever you actually intended to do. This is not a conspiracy. It is simply the logical outcome of a business model. But understanding it changes how you relate to these platforms. You are not a user making free choices. You are a resource being harvested, and you can choose how much of yourself to make available. The attention economy and your goals are in direct conflict. Every minute of fragmented, distracted, platform-directed attention is a minute that is not building the skill you're trying to develop, the relationship you're trying to deepen, the project you're trying to complete, or the health you're trying to maintain. This is not moralizing about screen time. It is a mathematical reality. Attention is finite, and where it goes is where your life goes. Managing your attention deliberately, protecting blocks of it for what matters most, designing your environment to minimize unintentional leakage, is not a luxury or a personality preference. It is the foundational behavior design decision from which all other productive behavior follows. Nothing else works if attention isn't managed. Every system, every habit, every commitment eventually fails against a sufficiently fragmented attention environment. Deep work as a competitive advantage. The ability to focus without distraction on cognitively demanding tasks, what researcher Cal Newport has called deep work, is simultaneously becoming more valuable and more rare. More valuable because the complex, creative, high-skill work that produces the most impact requires sustained, undistracted focus. More rare because the digital environment is systematically eroding most people's capacity for it. This creates an asymmetry. The person who deliberately protects and develops their capacity for deep focus is operating with a capability that the majority of their peers are losing. Not through superior talent, not through superior discipline in the heroic sense, simply through the choice to design their environment and their schedule in a way that makes sustained attention possible. Practical exercise 19, the attention audit. For 2 days, every time you pick up your phone or open a new browser tab, know what you were doing immediately before and what prompted the switch. At the end of 2 days, review the log. You will likely find that the majority of attention switches were not intentional breaks. They were automatic escape responses to moments of difficulty or boredom in whatever you were supposed to be doing. That automatic escape is the behavior to address, not through willpower applied in the moment, but through environmental design that removes or delays the escape route. Practical exercise 20, the protected hour. Identify 1 hour in your day, ideally the first hour of your working day, and designate it as a fully protected focus block. During this hour, no phone, no email, no messaging, no social media. One task, worked on with full attention. This is not a radical intervention. It is 1 hour. But 1 hour of genuine, undivided attention on what matters most, applied consistently over months, produces results that feel disproportionate to the time invested. That disproportionality is the return on attentional quality. Chapter 19. The Long Game. Why Consistency Beats Intensity Every Time. There is a particular kind of person who approaches self-improvement in bursts. They go all in for 2 weeks, perfect diet, daily exercise, early mornings, deep work, no distractions. They feel the momentum building, feel themselves becoming the person they want to be. And then something disrupts the streak. An illness, a deadline, a family crisis, a bad week, and the whole structure collapses. 2 weeks later, they're back where they started, sometimes further behind, carrying the additional weight of another failed attempt. This pattern is not a character flaw. It is a design flaw. The system was built for intensity, not durability. And intensity without durability is, over time, simply an elaborate form of staying in place. The research on long-term behavior change is unambiguous on this point. Consistency over time outperforms intensity at any single point. A person who exercises 3 times per week for 2 years builds incomparably more, physically, neurologically, and in terms of identity, than a person who exercises twice daily for 2 months and then stops. A person who writes 1 page every day for a year produces more and becomes more capable than a person who writes 20 pages in a weekend surge 4 times a year. This is because the mechanism of change is not effort alone. It is effort plus repetition plus time. The repetition builds the neural pathways. The time allows them to consolidate. The identity catches up to the behavior only after the behavior has been consistent long enough to constitute evidence. You cannot rush this process with intensity. You can only sustain it with consistency. Sustainability as a design criterion. When designing any behavior change, the first question to ask is not, what would produce the maximum result, but what can I sustain indefinitely? These questions have very different answers. Maximum result thinking produces extreme protocols that work brilliantly for a short period and then collapse under their own unsustainability. Indefinite sustainability thinking produces modest protocols that seem underwhelming at first but compound into extraordinary results over time. The workout you can do 3 times a week forever is worth infinitely more than the workout you can do twice a day for 6 weeks. The writing habit you can maintain every morning for years is worth infinitely more than the writing marathon you do in a burst of inspiration twice a year. The modest, sustainable, boring consistency is not a compromise. It is the actual strategy. This requires a specific kind of ego management. Intensity feels good. It feels like you're taking your goals seriously, like you're making up for lost time, like you're the kind of person who goes all in. Modest consistency feels underwhelming. It doesn't make a good story. Nobody posts about writing 1 page today. But the 1 page, written every day, is what builds the book. And the book is what matters. Recovery as part of the system. Sustainable consistency requires treating recovery not as a reward for effort, but as a structural component of the system. The athlete who never rests doesn't build more fitness. They build injury and burnout. The knowledge worker who never disengages doesn't produce more. They produce cognitive depletion and diminishing quality. The person trying to build new habits who treats every missed day as a catastrophic failure doesn't build more resilience. They build shame and avoidance. Rest, recovery, and imperfect days are not failures of the system. They are features of any system designed for the long run. The question is not whether you will have off days. You will. The question is whether your system is designed to absorb them without collapsing. Does missing 1 day end your streak permanently, or does your system treat it as a single data point in a longer trend? Does 1 bad meal invalidate the entire nutritional pattern, or does the pattern simply continue at the next meal? Systems designed for humans, with their inevitable variation, fatigue, and disruption, build in resilience. Systems designed for ideal conditions collapse the first time conditions are not ideal. Practical exercise 21, the minimum viable habit. For each behavior you're trying to establish, Define a minimum viable version, the smallest, most stripped-down version of the behavior that still counts. If your full exercise session is 45 minutes, your minimum viable version might be 10 minutes of movement. If your full writing session is an hour, your minimum viable version might be one paragraph. The minimum viable version serves one purpose. It keeps the chain unbroken on days when the full version is genuinely impossible. It maintains the identity and the neural pathway even when life prevents the full execution. Over a year, the chain of minimum viable days plus full days produces far more than a pattern of perfect streaks followed by complete collapses. Chapter 20. Closing the Loop, the Life Built by Action. We began this book with a question embedded in its title. How do you force your mind to do hard things? Having traveled through the architecture of the mind's resistance, through the mechanics of action and identity, through the engineering of systems and environments, the answer is now clear, and it is both simpler and more demanding than most people hope. You don't force your mind, you redesign it. Not through willpower applied against resistance at each moment of difficulty, though some willpower is always required, especially early, but through the sustained, patient, unglamorous work of changing what your mind considers normal, of accumulating enough evidence that hard things are survivable that your nervous system stops treating them as threats, of keeping enough small promises that your brain stops questioning whether you can be trusted, of repeating behaviors often enough that they stop requiring conscious effort and start happening because that's simply who you are. This is not a short process. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling something. The neurological remodeling that produces genuine, durable behavioral change takes months. The identity shift that allows you to say, I am someone who does hard things, and actually believe it, not as an affirmation but as an accurate description, takes consistent action repeated across hundreds of days. There is no version of this that is quick or comfortable or convenient. But here is what you gain on the other side of that process: a life that is genuinely yours. Not a life shaped by your avoidances, your comfort preferences, your comfort software's default settings. A life built by your choices, by the actions you took when you didn't feel like it, by the commitments you kept when no one would have noticed if you'd broken them, by the 100,000 small hard things you did anyway, day after day, building an architecture that can hold the weight of the person you intended to become, the person you are becoming. Every chapter of this book has pointed toward the same destination from a different angle, a version of you that doesn't need optimal conditions to function, that doesn't require motivation to begin, that doesn't negotiate with the voice that says stop, that doesn't wait for permission or inspiration or the right moment. A version of you that has internalized a simple, irreducible truth. The only moment available for action is this one. And the only question worth asking in this moment is what the person you are becoming would do. That person is not perfect. They have bad days and off weeks and moments when the comfort software wins. They miss workouts and break streaks, and sometimes need to be reminded of what they said they valued. They are human, which means they are imperfect by design and resilient by necessity. But they are pointed in a direction. They know, from accumulated experience, that they can begin without feeling ready, that they can continue past the voice that says stop, that they can keep a promise to themselves even when breaking it would cost them nothing visible. And that knowledge, that specific, evidence-based, earned knowledge, is worth more than any external circumstance, any talent advantage, any fortunate starting point. The final practice. Every evening, ask yourself one question. Not did I achieve everything I planned? Not was I perfectly disciplined? Just this. Did I do at least one hard thing today that I could have avoided? One thing. That's the standard. Not perfection. Not heroism. One moment in which you chose difficulty over ease, follow through over avoidance, the person you're becoming over the comfort of the person you've been. One moment in which you demonstrated to yourself and no one else that you are capable of doing the thing your mind told you not to do. Stack enough of those moments together, across days, across weeks, across the months that quietly become years, And you will look up one day and find that the life around you has been rebuilt from the inside out. Not by some dramatic transformation, not by a single decision that changed everything, but by the relentless, patient, ordinary practice of doing hard things anyway. That practice is available to you right now. It doesn't require better conditions. It doesn't require more time or more energy or more inspiration. It requires only the next action, the one your mind is already suggesting you postpone. Don't postpone it.